Hello and welcome. Today we're going to paint Ride to the Sydney Opera House, a vibrant watercolor capturing the energy of a sunlit Sydney street, framed by blooming jacaranda trees with the iconic sails of the Opera House glowing in the distance. For this painting, I'm using colors: permanent orange, burnt sienna, cobalt blue, neutral tint, cadmium red, yellow ochre, sepia, and lavender. Brushes: flat, mop, and point brushes. Paper: A3 cold press watercolor paper. Let's paint together. Grab your brushes and let's begin. Step 1. Sketching. I'm starting with a soft 5B pencil to lightly sketch the composition. I block in the iconic arching shells of the Opera House at the top center, then map out the road converging toward it in perspective, placing the cyclist and cars in the foreground. I keep the pencil marks loose and light. Watercolor needs room to breathe. The 5B pencil gives me beautiful soft lines that won't fight through the paint later. I'm not after perfection here, just enough structure to guide my washes. Notice how the road lines lead the eye straight to the Opera House, creating that sense of journey. Step 2. Sky and first wash, building atmosphere. I wet the entire sky area with clean water using my mop brush, then drop in cobalt blue across the upper section and let yellow ochre bloom in where the light warms the horizon. I tilt the paper slightly and let the colors merge on their own. Wetting the paper first lets the pigments move freely. This wet-on-wet technique gives that luminous, atmospheric glow that's so characteristic of watercolor. The cobalt blue reads as open sky, while the yellow ochre suggests warm sunlight filtering through with wash. While the sky is still damp, I move quickly to the lower half. I mix permanent orange and burnt sienna to paint the warm tones of the Opera House structure. I add cadmium red and sepia into the midground for depth. Then, using neutral tint with a touch of cobalt blue, I sweep the dark shadow shapes across the street. Speed matters here. I want these washes to connect softly while things are still wet. The warm permanent orange against the cool blue shadow on the street already sets up that contrast between sunlit calm and urban energy. The first wash does the heavy lifting in watercolor. Everything that follows builds on it. Step 3. Jacarandas, shadows, and midground. Using my mop brush loaded with lavender and cobalt blue, I dab and press the brush to build the lacy jacaranda canopies framing both sides of the composition. I vary the pressure, sometimes rolling the brush, sometimes just touching the tip to the paper, to suggest clusters of blossom rather than painting every flower. The jacarandas are the soul of this painting. That violet blue against the warm yellows and oranges creates the tension I was after. Soft and romantic, yet alive. Now I'm switching to darker values for the Opera House. Using sepia and neutral tint, I paint the deep shadows inside the shell forms and beneath the structure, giving those iconic sails their three-dimensional weight. With a flat brush and a mix of yellow ochre, burnt sienna, and sepia, I loosely suggest the buildings on both sides of the street. I'm not painting detail, I'm painting light and shadow. I leave edges soft where the buildings meet the sky and push dark accents where they recede into shade. Now I paint the cars on the right. Using yellow ochre for the body and neutral tint for the strong cast shadows, I anchor them firmly onto the street. These hard-edged shadows tell us exactly where the sun is sitting. Notice how I'm letting some edges stay lost and others go sharp? That's what gives the midground that sense of movement and air. The buildings don't need to be precise, they need to feel right. And those strong shadows on the street, they're the rhythm of the painting. They pull you forward, down the road, toward the Opera House. Step 4. Detailing, dry brush, and highlights. Now the fun part, the golden cyclist. I load my point brush with permanent orange and paint the cyclist and the warm car behind him with confident, decisive strokes. A touch of cadmium red warms the shadows on them. I then scatter tiny figures along the footpaths using quick gestural marks. No detail, just the suggestion of people. The permanent orange cyclist is the heart of this composition. The eye goes to him first, then follows the road up to the opera house. I'm keeping these marks loose and expressive. In watercolor, a figure painted in 3 strokes often reads better than one labored over for 10. I load a small flat brush with sepia, then drag most of the moisture off on a paper towel. Using just the edge of the barely damp brush, I drag it quickly across the paper to suggest tree trunks and branches. The bristles skip across the paper's texture, leaving broken, scratchy marks. This is the dry brush technique, one of watercolor's most powerful tools for creating texture. Because the brush is nearly dry, it catches only the raised surface of the cold-pressed paper, leaving a broken, energetic line that perfectly mimics bark, rough surfaces, or distant foliage. The key is speed. Drag it quickly, don't press too hard, and let the paper do the work. It's completely different from a wet wash, and that contrast between the two is what makes watercolor so dynamic. Tip: always test your dry brush on a scrap piece of the same paper first. Cold press texture can vary significantly between brands and will change how the dry brush mark looks. Using a fine point brush and sepia, I add sharp, decisive darks. The darkest windows, the deepest shadow under the opera house eaves, the crisp edges of the car roof lines. These final darks make everything else sing. Finally, I pick up white watercolor paint, not gouache, pure white watercolor. And with a dry brush technique, I drag it across the wet road to suggest reflections and shimmering light. I dot tiny highlights onto the opera house shells and a bright point on the cyclist's helmet. White watercolor used sparingly and with a slightly dry brush gives a luminous, sparkling quality to highlights, especially for those shiny reflections on a wet road. I prefer it over white gouache here because it stays more transparent and integrates gently with the layers underneath, rather than sitting on top like a correction. Less is always more with white. A few well-placed touches read as pure light. And there we have it. Ride to the Sydney Opera House, complete. I hope you enjoyed painting along with me today and picked up a few new techniques, especially that dry brush texture. It's such a beautiful tool for bringing life and energy to a scene. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below. I'd love to see your version of this painting. And if you'd like to join me for more watercolor tutorials, please hit subscribe and follow the channel so you never miss a new one. Thank you so much for painting with me today. Until next time, keep those brushes moving and keep exploring color. See you in the next one.